Today we're looking at enemy awareness and the strategies that I use to find players in PUBG. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and drop a comment. That really helps me out more than you guys know. Snap looking for enemies involves using your free look function by holding the right bumper and scanning the environment in every direction looking for enemies. The tip here is to hold RB to rotate your camera to a position and then hold it still while you look for movement. If you try and look for players with your camera moving, you're going to have a really rough time due to the frame rate in PUBG on console. This way, anything that moves, even if it's just a few pixels off in the distance, you can conclude is probably an opponent. And once you're done looking in one direction, let go of RB to snap your camera back to its default position. Additionally, on this point, anything that you see that is slightly out of the ordinary, for example discolorations in building windows or dark objects at the peak of hills, may warrant a closer look. Learn your opponent's movement patterns. Regardless of the skill level of an opponent, there's always one constant regarding their movements in PUBG, and that is the blue zone and the nature of the closing circles. Towards the later stages of the game especially, players can't survive outside of the blue zone for very long at all, so playing towards the edge of the zone is an excellent way to find enemies and easy kills. Also, sneaky snakes have a tendency to only be mobile from zone to zone as the circle pushes in around them, and once they enter the next safe zone, they rug themselves up in a cozy little bush, so you're much more likely to come across campers and people hiding behind average cover such as rocks or trees if you play the edge of the circle. Keep in mind that campers can be deadly if gone undetected, but if you're expecting them and actively on the lookout, they really are sitting ducks. The next tip is essential knowledge if you want to understand your enemy's movement patterns in PUBG. Learn how the wedge works. Being closer to the wedge allows for more time to move into the new circle, and for that reason it's a popular place to be. An experienced player will always be aware of where they're situated compared with the wedge. An excellent player, however, will use this understanding as an opportunity to farm kills by floating around this area and having the freedom to engage in gunfights without the pressing worry of a fast closing circle. We'll touch more on the wedge very shortly. But the next tip is essentially learn to camp. The dynamic nature of PUBG means that if you position yourself wisely, you can almost guarantee that players will eventually come your way. And by knowing the probable hot areas of a map, you can encounter multiple enemies in a short period of time. Or you can choose to avoid those enemies. This is especially relevant on Sanhok due to the small map size and common third-party action. So what you'll often see me doing is finding an area just outside of the zone, locking it down, pushing out players that come too close, and waiting for those who are coming in from the blue. You can see in this example here, there's a good 3 to 4 minutes when I'm content with my position. So rather than pushing blindly to find other players, I lock this general area down and wait for enemies to come towards me. The additional advantage of this is that you clear the area behind you, so you can move on confidently into the next zone without as much concern of being snuck up on from behind. And again on Vikendi here, I understand the bridge is where people will want to push, and there's bound to be some campers in these buildings just outside of the zone, so I wait patiently. Understand the circle. If you understand how the circle works in PUBG, you also understand your enemy's movement patterns. We already touched a bit on working the circle via the wedge principle, but there's so much more to take into account regarding the circle or zone in PUBG. Always remember, if you're strategizing a move in PUBG due to the circle position, it's highly likely that your enemies have a very similar idea. By having this understanding, you can not only predict where your opponents will move to, but also stay unpredictable yourself. If I'm looking to play for the win, I often consider where the logical place to move to next would be, and then do something completely different, so it's harder for my enemies to predict my movements. Personally, however, I enjoy getting into heated battles, so I tend to push towards these highly populated areas. In this example here, there's 14 players left in a relatively small circle. You can see that I'm almost certain that there will be players in this compound, but my more immediate threat will be players coming in from the west, because remember, they have a lot of time to plan their movements precisely being on the wedge. So what you can see is the majority of my focus is to the outer of the zone, with the occasional check back towards my east, and I'm also utilising the snap looking principle, so if there's any movement, I'm less likely to miss it. And just give me a quick second here while But anyway, you can see right up until I spot both of my final enemies, I'm still keeping a very close eye for people pushing in from behind me, from that wedge area. Some other key points to take into account regarding the circle are that once the phase 4 zone closes, you're in trouble if you're outside the circle. This is when being in the blue really starts to chunk your health. At this stage, anything beyond the blue wall effectively becomes a dead zone. Use that knowledge to your advantage, and direct most of your attention to areas that are within the zone. Learn the different maps and how the circles close differently on each map. Keep in mind that on Sanhok, you can almost always outrun the circle, so it's easier for players to push in late from any side of the circle. On the larger maps, however, it's very hard to push in strategically late from anywhere other than the wedge, because the zone closes very fast from these sides of the circle. And also, play smart and logical. For example, if you're playing on Miramar and the zone pushes hard towards the east, you can be pretty confident that there's going to be people pushing in extra late to the circle. So it might be worth directing a bit more of your attention to people who could potentially still be in the blue zone. Play aggressive but attentive. Third partying another gunfight is a great way to find easy kills, because both players are often wounded and preoccupied, which is an awful combination for them, but an excellent opportunity for you. Things to keep in mind when third partying are: can I get close enough to take shots before the winner of that fight gets a chance to heal? If not, you're probably going to end up just thoughtlessly pushing your enemy, so it might be best to back off and rethink your strategy. What is the zone doing? Am I subjecting myself to being caught in the blue in phase 3 or later? Can I instead use the zone to lure this opponent into a trap? Think to yourself, where would I move to next if I were them? And also, it's very important to take close note of your opponent's names, what weapons they're using, and how quickly they ended their previous opponent. You can do this by listening closely and taking note of the kill feed. The advantage you gain here is a better understanding of how you match up against your opponent. For example, if I'm third partying a gunfight inside a building and one guy gets absolutely lasered by an excellent close range weapon like a Vector, it's probably not going to end very well if I run in guns blazing. So rather I might play the outside of the building, use throwables, or simply bail and get the hell out of there and choose to fight that opponent at a later date when the odds are more in my favour. By taking note of your opponent's names in the kill feed, you also gain a better idea of if you've cleared that area. If you third party a fight and kill someone with a completely different name, you know for a fact there's another sneaky snake nearby. One of the more common questions I get is, how do I avoid being shot while I'm running late into the zone? And to be honest, sometimes there's not much you can do. There are going to be players who are going to shoot at you. That's just how PUBG is. But there are some things to take into account that might minimise these chances. How vulnerable you are is often dependent on whereabouts you're pushing into the zone from. Keep in mind, like we mentioned before, if you're pushing in towards the wedge, it's much more likely that people are waiting for you, as it's a more highly populated area. If you're pushing in from the fat side of the zone, then chances are that people are more preoccupied with actually getting to the new zone, so their attention is more likely on running than shooting at you. Always assume that you're being lined up. Try to minimize the times that you run in a straight line for longer than a second or two. This may result in taking an extra few seconds to get to the zone, but minimizes the chances of your opponent landing their first shot, so you can duck and weave and get to cover without being hit. And also try and stay boosted. This will depend on how much looting you've had the chance to do or how many other players you've killed, but this will allow you to get to the zone with more health left without having to stop and med as often along the way, which is when you're a very easy target. And probably the most important tip on this is to think ahead. Premeditate where you're going to have to push to, and if that involves running across a wide open field without any cover, then you might want to get moving early and try and avoid that. So that's going to about do it for this video, guys. I appreciate you watching, and I hope that you found this useful. Stay tuned for my subscriber series video, which will hopefully be out over the next week or so. But until then, take it easy, and I'll see you next time.